Major funding for this program has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional funding has been provided by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, public television stations, the American Architectural Foundation of the American Institute of Architects, and the National Concrete Masonry Association.
These are the pyramids of Giza. Of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, these are the only structures that still remain. And remain they will, as long as any man-made object exists on this planet. The pyramids were already about 1,500 years old when the Greek historian Herodotus first wrote about them 5 centuries before the birth of Christ. They presented a tantalizing mystery to Herodotus, and in many ways that mystery has survived, along with the Great Pyramids themselves, over thousands of years. Like every tourist who's ever journeyed to Egypt, Herodotus was fascinated by all he saw. The first thing he wanted to know was why these incredible structures were built. And then he wanted to know how. How could a society which existed 2,000 years before the flowering of his own magnificent culture have been powerful enough, ingenious enough, dedicated enough, and organized enough to have erected such imposing monuments on the edge of this unforgiving desert? His first answer was the Nile. Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and one glance at the disparity between these arid sands and the green Nile Valley tells us why. For it was here, between the edges of the desert and the banks of the Nile, that civilization first appeared in the form of early settlements. These early settlers caught fish, domesticated animals, fashioned metal, shaped bricks out of the river's mud, and learned to make paper from a river plant called papyrus. They also grew grain, thousands of acres of it, in a land where there was no appreciable rainfall. They were able to do all of this because of the Nile. Until the construction of the Aswan High Dam in the mid-1960s, the Nile would unfailingly overflow its banks once a year. This annual flood, called the inundation, irrigated fields, filled canals and reservoirs, and deposited a rich layer of black silt over vast tracts of farmland, which would otherwise have been nothing but desert. As the flood waters receded, farmers quickly moved into action, surveying boundaries, clearing fields, and planting seeds in the freshly nourished soil. Such communal efforts also nourished these early settlements. And by around 3000 BC, there were established communities along the 600-mile length of the Nile. The valley and its surrounding territory had also become organized into 2 independent and often antagonistic nations, called simply Upper and Lower Egypt. This is a slate palette portraying a king named Narmer, who we believe to be the ruler who unified Upper and Lower Egypt, and thereby started the civilization on its path to greatness. It's kept here in the famous Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Though we know very little about Narmer or how he brought the 2 regions together, we can identify each of them by looking at the crowns worn by the king. On one side, Narmer is wearing the crown of Upper Egypt, shaped something like a bowling pin. On the other side, he's wearing the crown of Lower Egypt, shaped something like a chair. From then on, the crowns were combined to symbolize the unification. After Narmer, there were approximately 30 dynasties, spanning about 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian civilization. Historians group these dynasties into 3 major periods: the Old, the Middle, and the New Kingdoms. Our story takes place in the Old Kingdom's 4th dynasty, about 2500 BC. It is the story of Khufu, one of Egypt's most illustrious kings and the builder of the Great Pyramid. It was during the Old Kingdom that Egypt was becoming the major civilization of the world. Central to the understanding of why the Egyptian civilization worked the way it did was the role and function of kingship and the organizational network that flowed from the royal palace. Although the king was all-powerful, he was supposed to be led by a guiding concept known as Mat. Mat was the ideal of a universe in perfect harmony, as it was said to have been in the time of the gods. This perfect order also had to do with right and wrong, and how the society as a whole functioned. Mat was often represented as a goddess who wore a single feather in her headdress, symbolizing the delicate balance between stability and chaos, both in the universe and within the human condition. The king stood at the apex of a pyramid society. A few people at the top, supported by a huge base of peasants and laborers. This was an aristocratic culture, ruled by a privileged class which drew power from its relationship to the king. And this king was not merely a privileged mortal. He was also considered to be a god who drew his power from the very essence of creation.
The world began as a watery chaos, which was called Nun. And it was from this chaos that the sun god Re emerged onto a mound. And the great mound from which Re created the universe and all its living things became a shape of great creative power, sacred to all the world. But unlike other mountains upon this earth, the only being who can ascend to its pinnacle is the god himself, the living son of Re, king of Upper and Lower Egypt.
Everything and everyone in the universe has a place. It was my grandfather Sneferu's place to be king. Now he has become Osiris, ruler of the underworld. And so it is my father, Khufu's place to be king. As it will someday be my older brother, Kawab's. That is all part of the balance of Mat, and it is most important that Mat be maintained in these troubled and difficult times after the death of a great king. All of this has been taught to me from a very young age by the royal vizier, Ankaf, who knew that it was my place to be a scribe, a man of learning.
Hodedef, you will be our eyes and ears throughout the kingdom.
Thank you, sire.
And you will help keep my name alive when I leave this earth to become Osiris.
Not for many, many years, I hope, father.
Whenever it happens, we must be prepared for it.
Yes, we certainly must.
Which leads me to the subject of your own eternal home, a great lord of the two lands.
My pyramid must be every bit as grand as my father's.
Indeed.
But without the compromises forced upon the builder. As you recall, Ankaf, when my father's first pyramid was half completed, cracks and faults began to form, and there was clearly instability within the structure.
Yes, I recall it well. So at that point, the architect decreased the angle of ascent to 43 degrees.
Leaving a structure which appears to hesitate on its rise toward the sun.
My father is not a man for hesitation.
But as your majesty sees, in your father's second pyramid, the one to the north, the same slope is maintained throughout the height, rendering a perfect structure.
Not quite. You will build me a pyramid as daring as his first began, yet as massive as his second. In short, the greatest pyramid of all, so that no one who sees it can doubt the power and the glory of the King of Egypt, from now until the end of time. And you will build it not in the shadow of my father's pyramid at Dashur, but across the great virgin expanse at Giza.
It wasn't long before Ankaf returned to the royal court at Memphis with his plans.
As it is customary, we will construct your necropolis on the west bank of the Nile, where the sunboat of your father is seen to set, where the passage to the next world begins. Now, the site your majesty so wisely chose allows us to build on a suitably splendid scale. Adjoining your great pyramid, we will place 3 smaller pyramids for your 3 gracious queens, as well as many tombs for the beloved members of your court.
While my father found favor with the plan, my mother had certain objections.
Since I am the main queen, it would seem only fitting that my pyramid be larger than the other 2.
You see, my queen...
It was my father's 3rd queen, Enutzen, who provided the logical explanation.
My dear, think of what you are saying. If your pyramid were to be built larger than those of the other queens, it would detract from the main pyramid of our Lord and Divine King.
Quite so, noble queen. As you see, my lord, the plan will afford a suitable location at the proper time for the pyramid of your successor.
My brave son, Kawab.
Your remaining children will continue surrounding you and serving you for all eternity in suitably impressive tombs.
My learned son, Hordedef, the scribe, will record your progress for me.
One further advantage of the Giza site: it is located just across the Nile from Tura, the finest limestone quarries in all your realm. When the river is at flood stage, it will be a relatively simple process to ferry the blocks across from Tura. And we will have our main quarry close by to provide the thousands of blocks we will need for the inner core. The site itself is now being cleared and leveled. And so that the pyramid may serve our king as his pathway to the imperishable stars, it must be laid out in precise relation to the 4 corners of the earth. Once completed, we will be ready to begin.
Now we are ready to begin. This way. It's all here, just as we suspected. Quickly now, gather everything together. They won't hold the door for us all night. Ninak?
Yes.
Thank the gods it's you. As always, your help is appreciated. The plan you drew was completely accurate.
It should be. I helped supervise the construction of this tomb myself.
And as always, your contribution is well rewarded.
Good, now go. If anyone finds out about this, the king himself will have me torn limb from limb.
As you see, Hordedef, the 2 rooms are already being chiseled out of the solid rock below ground level. These will serve as the tomb chamber and storage room, and will be entered through a gradually descending shaft. 2 granite portcullises will be lowered to seal the entrance to your tomb chamber after burial. Once the tomb itself is complete, we can begin the first course of stones.
At which point, my father's pyramid begins its transformation from dream to reality.